Even at Graceland, he would be dressed up, coming down the staircase. No pajamas.
She was the woman beside the king. Poised, elegant, beautiful. To the world, Priscilla Presley was the picture-perfect symbol of glamour. The girl who won the heart of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. But behind the dazzling smile, beneath the luxury of Graceland, and far beyond the reach of camera flashes, was a young woman shaped by loss, loneliness, and quiet heartbreak. From her earliest memories, Priscilla's life was marked not by fairy tales, but by farewells. Her father, a brave Navy pilot, died in a tragic crash before she could form a single memory of his face. By the time she was 6 months old, she had already lost the man who gave her life. Then came the endless moves, one military base after another, new faces, new schools, and always that same nagging feeling. She didn't belong. She didn't fit in. She was always starting over. And then, at just 14 years old, she met Elvis Presley, the most famous man on the planet, and he wanted her. It should have been the beginning of a dream. Instead, it was the start of a life where she would slowly disappear into someone else's shadow. To the world, their love story was legendary, but behind closed doors, it was filled with emotional distance, strict control, and a constant need to mold her into the image he wanted. She was adored by millions, but in her own home, she often felt invisible. After the divorce, many assumed she would fade quietly from the public eye. Instead, Priscilla tried to build a life of her own. She started businesses. She acted in hit films. She raised her daughter, Lisa Marie, often alone. And yet, loss would follow her like a shadow. From failed relationships to personal betrayals, from professional pressure to devastating family tragedies, Priscilla Presley's life tells a story not of fame and fortune, but of endurance, grace, and private grief. You know her as the king's queen. But do you know what she gave up to be there? This is the heartbreaking, untold story of Priscilla Presley's life, a life touched by beauty, defined by resilience, and shaped by sorrow. Priscilla Ann Wagner was born on May 24, 1945 in Brooklyn, New York, just as the world was emerging from the shadows of World War II. Her father, James Frederick Wagner, was a proud U.S. Navy pilot. Young, devoted, and deeply in love with her mother, Ann Iverson, James had married her only months earlier, in August of 1944. For a time, it looked like the perfect start to a hopeful future. But fate had different plans. Just 6 months after Priscilla's birth, tragedy struck. James Wagner was killed in a devastating plane crash while returning home on leave. He never made it back. He never saw his daughter take her first steps. And Priscilla, barely out of infancy, lost her first and most important connection. Her mother, left widowed and adrift, remarried in 1948 to Paul Beaulieu, a Canadian Air Force officer. With that union, Priscilla took his last name, Beaulieu, and her life became that of a military child, which meant never settling. The family moved from Connecticut to New Mexico, then to Maine, and later Texas, a constant carousel of bases and barracks. Just when she would begin to feel like she belonged somewhere, they'd pack up and leave. Priscilla would later describe herself during those years as a shy, quiet girl, unsure of herself, constantly trying to adjust, and deeply affected by the absence of stability. She never knew what it meant to have a hometown, a best friend who stuck around, or even a bedroom she could call her own for more than a few months. She would look out the window at night, wondering if she would ever stay in one place long enough to plant roots. Instead, She learned to adapt by blending in, hiding her emotions, becoming the agreeable girl who didn't cause waves. But the wounds were there. Losing a father before she could know him, growing up with the lingering ache of abandonment, and carrying the quiet loneliness of a child who never really fit in. Even as a young girl, loss and uncertainty had already become the themes of her life, and it would only be the beginning. Because at age 14, in the unlikeliest of places, a foreign country, a new military base, her path would cross with someone who would change everything, someone whose fame would fill the silence, but never heal the void. In 1959, Priscilla's life took another unexpected turn when her stepfather was transferred to Wiesbaden, Germany. She was just 14 years old, still shy, still guarded, still carrying the quiet ache of always being the new girl in town. She never imagined she'd meet the most famous man in the world. Elvis Presley, already a global icon, was stationed nearby while serving in the U.S. Army. By then, he was larger than life, the voice that made girls scream, the face that adorned every magazine. And yet, one night at a party on base, he noticed her. Not the older girls, not the ones dressed to impress. Her, the quiet teenager with wide eyes and a soft voice. She was just a high school freshman. He was 24. The age gap, unthinkable by today's standards, was downplayed, even romanticized. Elvis was drawn to her innocence, her sweetness, the fact that she didn't ask him for anything. To Priscilla, it felt like a fairy tale. The king of rock and roll wanted her. And so, the emotional grooming began. He sent cars to pick her up from school, wrote her letters, whispered dreams into her ears. Over time, her parents, initially hesitant, were persuaded by his charm and promises of protection. At 17, she moved into Graceland, not as a girlfriend, not as a wife, but as something in between, a porcelain figure in a palace built for someone else. Everything about her was gradually shaped by his vision. He told her how to dress, how to wear her hair, what books to read or avoid. He once famously said, "I want a girl who's young and moldable." And mold her he did. She lived among luxury, yes, but also within invisible walls. No freedom, no real friends, no voice of her own. It was a life full of adoration and control, where love came with conditions. The world saw a fairy tale. But Priscilla was quietly learning that love, at least the kind she had with Elvis, could both elevate and erase you. This love would make her famous, and eventually break her apart. On May 1st, 1967, in a private suite at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas, Priscilla Beaulieu became Priscilla Presley. The world watched in awe. The most sought-after man on earth had finally chosen a bride. Photos of the ceremony spread like wildfire, her black eyeliner perfect, her white gown flawless, her smile fixed in place. But what those pictures couldn't show was the price she paid to stand beside him. Graceland was no ordinary home. It was Elvis's kingdom, a place of grandeur, yes, but also rules, secrets, and unspoken expectations. Priscilla may have worn the crown of the king's bride, but in truth, she was a captive behind velvet ropes. From the start, their marriage was marked by distance, both emotional and physical. Elvis was often on the road, and even when he was home, he lived on his own schedule. Days turned into nights. Parties bled into silence. Priscilla, still barely in her 20s, learned to adapt again. She gave birth to Lisa Marie Presley on February 1st, 1968, the couple's only child. In that moment, she felt real purpose, real love. But even motherhood became another role she had to play within Elvis's carefully curated world. She was not allowed to work. She could not pursue acting, dancing, or modeling, dreams she'd held on to since childhood. Even her fashion, praised by fans, was curated to match the fantasy Elvis wanted the world to believe. In interviews, she smiled. In public, she shimmered, but inside she was shrinking. The girl who once dreamed of belonging, now wondering if she even belonged to herself. Elvis's infidelities became harder to ignore. Rumors swirled. Some were true, others were cruel. But through it all, Priscilla remained silent, loyal to a fault, believing, or at least hoping, that love could still save them. But it couldn't, and she knew it. By 1972, Priscilla made a decision that stunned the world. She left him. To outsiders, it seemed impossible. Why would anyone walk away from the king? But only she knew how it felt to be idolized by millions while feeling unseen in her own home. Graceland wasn't just a mansion. It was a golden cage. And finally, after years of sacrificing herself for someone else's legend, she found the courage to walk out of it. Walking away from Elvis was not the end of Priscilla's story. It was the beginning of her most difficult chapter, rebuilding her identity in the shadow of a legend. In 1973, at just 28 years old, she found herself a single mother, alone for the first time since her teenage years. The cameras kept flashing. The headlines didn't stop. To the world, she was still Elvis's ex-wife, but she refused to let that title define her. Priscilla quietly began forging her own path, not with loud declarations, but with quiet resilience. She co-founded a boutique called Biz & Beau with stylist Olivia Biz. Located in Los Angeles, it quickly became a hotspot for celebrities like Cher, Barbra Streisand, and Natalie Wood. She had an eye for fashion, but more importantly, she had a vision for her independence. Then she entered the business world, launching her own fragrance line in the late 80s, followed by a line of luxury linens. Each venture was more than a product. It was a statement. I exist beyond him. Still, no matter what she built, Elvis's name always hovered nearby. A reminder, a shadow, a standard no one could quite escape. In Hollywood, she took tentative steps. She appeared on shows like The Fall Guy and Touched by an Angel. But it was her role in the Naked Gun films, opposite Leslie Nielsen, that made her a comedic surprise. People laughed, she smiled, but few knew just how much strength it took to show up, day after day, and be seen as someone in her own right. Every new success came with a whisper. She's doing well, for someone who was with Elvis. Yet Priscilla kept going. Not loud, not flashy, just steady, quietly proving that the girl who once disappeared into someone else's world was finally learning how to build her own. She was no longer just surviving, she was becoming. After Elvis, Priscilla tried to open her heart again, but love, for all its promise, never gave her the peace she was seeking. Her first serious relationship post-divorce was with Mike Stone, the karate instructor Elvis had once introduced to her. It was intense, but short-lived. By 1975, it was over. Then came a series of names, some familiar, some forgotten by the public. Terry O'Neill, a British photographer. Robert Kardashian, long before his name was linked to a global empire. Ellie Ezzerzer, Kirk Kerkorian, and others who came and went, but never stayed. In 1978, she began dating Michael Edwards, a model and actor. The relationship lasted 6 years until something deeply unsettling surfaced. Michael later admitted he had developed feelings for Priscilla's teenage daughter, Lisa Marie. The public barely blinked, but for Priscilla, this must have felt like a personal betrayal. Another chapter of trust turned sour. Another relationship that fractured the home she tried to protect. Then came Marco Garibaldi, an Italian screenwriter turned programmer. For 22 years, they lived together. They had a son, Navarone, in 1987. It was the closest thing to stability she ever knew, but even that eventually faded. In 2006, they split, quietly, without scandal. But it was telling that at the very beginning of their romance, Priscilla made Marco sign a legal agreement promising never to write a book about her if they broke up. She was no longer naive. She had been burned too many times. In the years that followed, rumors swirled. Tom Jones, Barry Crocker, Richie Palmer, companions, perhaps, but never soulmates. Each relationship left her a little more guarded, a little more distant. She had learned how to be loved on the surface, adored even, but she had never been truly seen without being compared to her past. By her 70s, she lived largely in solitude, surrounded by memories that millions admired, but few truly understood. Priscilla Presley didn't just outlive Elvis. She outlived every version of love that tried to fill the void he left behind. For decades, Lisa Marie Presley was Priscilla's anchor, the one person who knew the real cost of their family's legacy. They had survived Elvis's death together. They had weathered scandal, distance, and grief. But nothing could prepare Priscilla for January 12, 2023. That day, her only daughter, her heart, collapsed suddenly in her home in Calabasas, California. Lisa Marie was rushed to the hospital in cardiac arrest. She never regained consciousness. She was 54 years old. In a brief statement, Priscilla wrote, "It is with a heavy heart that I must share the devastating news that my beautiful daughter Lisa Marie has left us." Those words, simple, restrained, barely captured the heartbreak of a mother burying her child. Lisa had lived a turbulent life. 4 marriages, including one to Michael Jackson, another to Nicolas Cage, a brief music career, public battles with addiction and sorrow, especially after the suicide of her son, Benjamin Keough, in 2008. But through it all, she was Priscilla's most personal, unbreakable bond. And now, she was gone. The world mourned Lisa as Elvis's daughter. But Priscilla? She mourned the last living thread of a past she could never escape, and the one person who could understand its burden. There were photos in the days that followed. Priscilla at the funeral, dressed in black, her face unreadable, dignified, but devastated. It was the final heartbreak in a life already defined by so many. She had lost her father before she ever knew him. She had lost her husband to addiction and fame. She had lost love, again and again, and now she had lost her daughter. The final, irreplaceable piece. Priscilla Presley was still standing, but inside, a silence had fallen that might never lift. When the cameras flashed and the world spoke her name, Priscilla Presley was often seen as one thing: the woman who once loved the king. But the truth, the one we so rarely see, is that she was more than just a former wife or a Hollywood face. She was a survivor, a woman who walked through the fire of early loss, who surrendered her youth to a love she didn't fully understand, who raised a daughter under the crushing weight of fame, and who faced the unimaginable, outliving that child. Through every heartbreak, through every headline, she remained composed, not because she didn't feel deeply, but because grace was her armor. There were moments the world celebrated her: red carpets, television roles, business successes, but for every public triumph, there was a private sorrow, a quiet pain that never made the press. And yet, she never lashed out, never collapsed publicly. She carried it all with a poise that many mistook for ease, but was really strength in disguise. We live in a world obsessed with icons, with glossy stories and neatly edited legacies. But Priscilla Presley's story reminds us of something more profound, that behind the beauty, behind the fame, there can live a soul etched with scars, and that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who never get to tell their side of the story. As we remember her, not just as Elvis's wife or Lisa Marie's mother, but as Priscilla, let's honor the quiet, enduring strength it took to live a life in the spotlight while carrying a heart broken by loss, but never consumed by it.